4 February 1965. Dearest Suzie, how are you and the boys getting along? Things are pretty quiet over here right now. This is the Oriental New Year season, and an unofficial truce has been called for a few days. We are still working with our usual missions, but no troop lifts. Last night I had OD, so I was up all night. Then this morning I took a flight for 2 hours, so I didn't get to sleep till 2 o'clock this afternoon. So I just passed out for a few hours. I'm afraid this will be a real short letter, but at least you will know that I'm thinking of you all. As I am all the time. Time seems to be dragging on me again, and it seems as though it is forever till I get to come home. I love you all very much. I will try to write a better letter tomorrow when I'm a little more awake. All my love. Bill. Poppy had 2 letters addressed on the 4th. I doubt that they were both written that day. More likely, he got one of them wrong, and it was actually the 2nd, or the 3rd, or the 5th. Either way, I'll read both today. Here's the next one. February 4, 1965. Dearest Suzie, sorry I waited so long to write, but I was kind of waiting to get a letter from you, and I haven't. It's not your fault, though. They haven't gotten any in the last 2 days. You remember I was worried before I came over here about having to take a check ride when I get back to the States to renew my instrument ticket. Well, I don't have that problem now, at least. I will have until March 16th, 1966 to renew it. I went out yesterday with an examiner and flew hood for an hour and a half and renewed my ticket. I was sure glad to get that out of the way. We also had an awards ceremony yesterday afternoon, and I got my first air medal. Things are pretty quiet now. We had a troop lift today, but it didn't amount to very much. I will start to work in our armed platoon Saturday morning. I'm sort of looking forward to doing something different. I'm going to quit for tonight. I love you very much and can hardly wait to get home to see you all. Just think, we are almost halfway. All my love, Bill. P.S. I still didn't get that camera back. They are evidently sending it by boat mail. Would you mind sneaking me some of those slides we made before I left of you and the boys in the next letter you write? Love, Bill. If you haven't listened to the past few episodes yet, you'll likely be a bit lost for the rest of today's episode. Long story short, I've split up a piece of writing of mine, and I'm presenting it across a few episodes. I recommend going back and listening to the earlier part. Anyway, here's Finding My Grief, Part 4. Meemaw, I stated, in amazement after she finished her story about how she and Poppy started their life together. How come I've never heard that before? She laughed to herself. I guess no one's ever asked. Well, thank you, I replied. So why did he join the army? As you know, his family was very poor, and he was the oldest of 7. He didn't want to be a dairy farmer like his father, and he had an uncle that told him the best thing to do would be to join the service, so he did, even before he graduated high school. Just left straight from Sanford and never looked back. It actually took months after we got married for him to tell the army to send his paychecks to our bank account. As soon as he joined the service, he sent all his money to his mother to help with his siblings. He loved his parents and wanted to do whatever he could to help them. We just needed the money more since we wanted to start our own family. Wow. I didn't realize he cared that much about everyone. Mimo laughed. Oh yeah. We almost didn't get married since I was a Yankee, Hungarian, and a Catholic, but Mrs. Lowie could see how much Pop wanted to marry me and eventually gave us her blessing. Especially after I let her teach me how to cook. Mr. Lowie, on the other hand, loved me from the start. They were great people. And sorry, Al. I don't remember what his favorite book was. Okay, I responded. Well, what was it like when you had your kids? Kid number 1. Well, we had the first just before Germany, soon after we got married, but we quickly returned to the U.S. after. Pop was an officer at the time and got promoted to being a drill sergeant. Germany was fun, and I wish we could have stayed, but the base was no place to raise a kid. We did have a dog when we were over there, but had to return it because it didn't speak English. So what about yours next, your second, Mimo? Any reason why he doesn't have a middle name? Kid number 2. He was born in North Carolina. Poppy was out in the field on a training exercise when I went into labor, and he refused to come to the hospital to help me during the pregnancy. He hadn't shown up by the time the baby came out, and I kept having one of the other officers' wives call the field to update him and ask what he wanted to name the new baby, but he was so impatient with me that he told me he didn't care and that it was up to me. They wouldn't let me take the baby out of the hospital without naming it, but I couldn't come up with any names. Finally, a nurse suggested his name, and that was that. I couldn't think of any other names and just wanted to go home, so I didn't give him a middle name. That's why his middle initial is S. It stands for space. I laughed. That's not surprising about Poppy, I said through a chuckle. Kid number 3. The third was born in Alabama, or was it Georgia, when Poppy was training to fly helicopters. By the time he came around, Pop knew I was mad at him for not being there with the second, and as soon as he got the call that I was in labor, he rushed back from training. When I got to the hospital, a nurse said, "Don't worry, Mrs. Lowie, your husband will be here for the baby." But I knew that was wrong. The baby wanted to come out, and he was born before Poppy could get there. His middle name is Alexander, after my brother. And then my parents told him I'm named after him, which I don't think is actually true. We both laughed. Child 4. Then there was your father. I had him after Pop returned from Vietnam. He was born in Orlando. Pop started fishing when your dad was 4.5 and was gone for a lot of his childhood. The photo I chose for today shows many American soldiers standing at ease in the boulevard of state flags in Vinh Long. It looks like some command officers walking across the frame. Could this be an award ceremony? Feb. 5. 1965. Dearest Suzie. This letter will be pretty short too, I'm afraid. I have to go out and might fly a while, and I want to get this in the mail before I go. I hope that you and the boys are fine. I've enclosed our income tax return. You have to sign it and stamp it and send it in. I asked for the refund in the form of a bond. I hope you don't object. This way, you will get a $100 bond at $75 cost and a check for $24. I'm going to put a note in to make the check payable to you so that you don't have any trouble getting it cashed. Things are the same for me. We do quite a bit of flying, but we aren't really hurting ourselves right now. I miss you more and more, and I love you so much. It will probably take at least 5 years for us to make up for this one. We didn't have any mail come in yesterday or today, so maybe we will get mail tomorrow. Tell Billy I'm still looking for a letter from him, and kiss all 3 of my boys for me. All my love. Bill. If you haven't listened to the past few episodes yet, you'll likely be a bit lost for the rest of today's episode. Long story short, I've split up a piece of writing of mine, and I'm presenting it across a few episodes. I recommend going back and listening to the earlier part. Anyway, here's Finding My Grief, Part 5. Wow, okay, I said. And what was Poppy like to each of them? Would you say they were all treated differently? Absolutely. How so? Child 1. Well, Billy was the oldest, and we definitely spoiled him. We still had money then, and when he was the only child, we gave him everything. Pop always expected great things out of him, since he had it so much easier than we did when we were growing up. Pop would discipline him sometimes, but he wouldn't really hurt him that much at first. He would buy Billy little army outfits and encourage him to join the military, too. We could tell Billy was kind of nerdy, too. He didn't do great in school, but certainly always passed his classes. Child 2. The next was treated much differently than Billy. You know he's dyslexic, so he had a learning disability. At first, we didn't know that, and the people at his school thought he might have been stupid. He was almost sent to a school for the learning disabled. When Pop found out, he thought he was just lazy, and he beat him so bad. He'd smack him in the knuckles with a ruler or make him hold his thumbs out on the table and smash them when he was doing homework and got an answer wrong. Even after we got the specialist to say that he had a learning disability, Pop didn't want to believe it. Pop always called him fat and stupid and believed it. I had one of the doctors tell me that he was smart but just couldn't read like you or me, and that if he got a job doing something with his hands, he'd excel. Child 3. The third was a different story entirely. He was always so weird as a kid and didn't mind getting in trouble. He'd always pick fights with his brothers. Hell, one time he picked up a spear that Poppy sent us from Africa and threw it at his older brother. Thankfully, he missed. When I tried to break up the fight after, they broke my ribs. He was always misbehaving, and whenever Pop was home, he'd beat him so badly you almost wouldn't believe it. There were times Pop would hit him so hard I'd have to put lotion on his legs and back to help make his skin feel better. I think he became so afraid of Pop that he always tried so hard to make Poppy proud because he was so afraid. Child 4. When your dad was born, I told Pop that I'd kill him if he ever laid a hand on my baby, and he never actually hit him. He went really easy on your dad too, especially after your dad had that grand mal seizure and almost died. We don't know what we'd have done if we'd lost him. Pop did still call him fat and lazy a bunch, though. That was until we took him to the doctor and found out he had a bone disease in his knees and your dad couldn't run. Pop called him names all the way until the day your dad got surgery, and he realized the doctors weren't just making things up. He felt bad after, but obviously never apologized. So, I said, do you think that all of the different ways Poppy treated the boys led them to all turn out differently? Like if they hadn't been so far away from each other in age, and if Poppy had treated them more alike, they wouldn't have had vastly different lives when they grew up? Just think about all that they've done in all of their relationships and kids and everything. Why are they so different? Child 1. Of course. Billy got married at 18 to his first wife, who was a few years younger. She lived with us until they moved out. He got a job working at 7-Eleven right out of high school. They even started paying for him to go to college and everything. He didn't even really start classes, though. He got into drugs and hanging out with his friends, playing foosball and things like that. Looking back on it, he obviously had mental problems for a while, but we didn't do anything about it. We couldn't. Pop wouldn't let us talk about it, which definitely didn't help, and I tried to ignore it because of what happened with my mother. Then he and his first wife got a divorce, and he met his second wife, who hated me. She drove him away from us, and he ignored all of us for years. They had their 2 kids, my first grandkids, and she used to abuse those kids so badly. That's why he divorced her. When he finally started coming around us again, he didn't even call me Mom, just Sue. After that, he met his third wife and had his next 2 kids. Once he used her name to scam people and steal money, she kicked him out and divorced him. As you know, after that, we tried to let him live with us on and off, but Pop didn't like it. But I always blame myself for all his problems. I always told myself that if we had done something to get him help with his head sooner, he wouldn't have been in a bad place. I figured that's why he was homeless so often. He also didn't want to get a job, so he didn't have to pay all the child support he still owed. Now, all 4 of his kids have grown up, with their own mental problems, and whatever else they're going through. Maybe his daughter wouldn't have had all 5 of her kids while on drugs, and maybe his oldest son would still be around today, but who really knows, you know? Child 2. The second got his job as a truck driver, which made Pop proud because he was able to make something of himself without having to read or write. He's done pretty well for himself, too. You know, leading the yard and all. He had his first daughter with his first wife, and after they got a divorce, he met his second wife. They had their second daughter. I think he does a pretty good job now as a father, and he's still with his second wife, so he turned out pretty good. And he's a great grandpa. Child 3. As far as our third son is concerned, that poor boy joined the military right out of high school to make Pop happy. He was such a troublemaker in school, and we were so glad he joined. He went in with his best friend at the time, who also always got in trouble, and we were relieved they didn't get assigned to the same jobs because it wouldn't have been good for either of them. But he traveled the world, and when he got out, he used the GI benefits to get his college degree and master's degree. Pop was so proud to go to his college graduations, and I know he was just trying to make Poppy proud. Then, when he met his wife, we liked her, but didn't like how she kept making him distance himself from the family. They even eloped without telling us. They had their 2 daughters, and were happy for quite some time until he had to travel a lot for work, and, was drinking and smoking all the time didn't help with things with his own family. He was so hurt when his wife divorced him because he felt like he had sacrificed so much for she and the girls. I'm so happy he left his big job in California, but he was certainly making a lot of money, which seemed to make everyone happy. Child 4. Then there's your dad. He was working practically full-time before he even graduated high school, and we haven't really told any of the other boys, but he helped Pop and I out for a while financially when he was living with us. That could have been because we let your mom live with us for a while when she got kicked out of her house. Did you know that Pop was the one who immediately told her to move in with us when he found out that she was living in her car? He didn't want to hear about any young ladies living on the street and being in danger. Once they moved out, your dad and mom still tried to help us when we needed it. Lord knows Pop never asked for any help, but we certainly appreciated it. Then, when they had you and your brother, and you know what he was like as a father better than I do, he loves you boys so much and has always been so willing to give up anything to help you two. You know what, Alex? When you think about all 4 of the boys separately, they really did turn out so different because of how Poppy treated each of them. Agreed, I said. The photo I chose for today is another photo he took over Viet Cong after the attack there by the VC a few months ago. A great reminder how vulnerable American bases were during the war. In the business, we call this foreshadowing. 231 days. 6. Feb. 65. My dearest Suzie, I received that nice, long, 6-page letter from you today and was real happy to get it. I have not given up the idea of going to Bangkok completely. I may go sometime before I come home, but I kinda doubt it. It is true that it would be a nice break, but I would be so upset over the money it would cost me and the things I could buy with that money that I wouldn't enjoy the trip. I wouldn't really enjoy it anyway without you. That is why I'm letting Lewis get a sapphire for you. I trust his judgment, and this way you'll have one in case I don't go. While I'm on the subject of the ring, I don't know how much it will cost, but as soon as Lewis gets back and I pay him for it, I will send you some money. I don't know how much I can send, but you can expect something about the middle of the month. Also, I went and sent that camera off for repair, and I don't know what it will cost me. I'm sure I overdid it this month. I should have realized that you would need extra money, especially now. If you run into a bind this month, though, put something off till the 1st of March. I will send you my extra check for sure then. It should be $75. And listen, don't be upset about not saving anything. If you're getting by without our bonds, and I think you are doing fine. I told you before that all I want you to do is live till I get back. Remember that it costs a lot extra living apart like this. And you are keeping up our bills. That is the important thing. Don't worry about that moving charge. If you ever get it, it shouldn't be over $40 anyway. And you will have 90 days to pay it. So let's worry about it when and if we get it. Besides, I'll get it myself when it comes. So you just relax and go on the next 7 months like you have the last 5. You are doing fine. You never did tell me what you want to do about going to Hawaii. Let me know so I will know how to plan, and whatever you say is fine with me. As far as the officer club, why don't you go out to McCoy and find out what I need to do to get you a membership? If they have any forms, just get them and send them to me. You may not need anything. I might have given you the wrong impression about the chow here. Things are bad, but we manage. I haven't really lost any weight. Did Jimmy come home this month? How are my folks getting along? They don't write much, or often. And that's where the letter ends. The next page of this letter was likely lost. If you haven't listened to the past few episodes yet, you'll likely be a bit lost for the rest of today's episode. Long story short, I've split up a piece of my writing, and I'm presenting it across a few episodes. I recommend going back and listening to the earlier parts. Anyway, here's Finding My Grief, Part 6. Do you think he changed as a father after he got back from Vietnam? Absolutely, replied Meemaw. He didn't drink as much and wasn't as willing to hit the boys. He disciplined them, sure, but nothing like when he got back. It's a wonder my dad got by as unscathed as he seemed to have. Well, by the time Bruce came around, Pop was fishing a lot and wasn't really around much, so I mostly raised him myself. Your dad was the only one born after Pop was over in Vietnam, and I think Pop was just tired after that. I don't know. It was a long but happy 55 years. Please don't forget just how close we all were when Poppy and I were living off of Redfern. Your uncle and his family might have been living in California, but everyone else got to visit often, and we had so many wonderful times together. Poppy was happy to be around everybody, and really loved you all. After this particular conversation, I asked her to look at pictures with me and just talk about them. First, we looked through her many photo albums which sat perpetually on her coffee table in the den, typically used as conversation starters for visitors. We came across photos of the trailer when they first moved up, before all the work was done to it. The elephant joke about Poppy quickly rang in my head. Why did you guys move up here in the first place, if we had such a great time in Orlando? Why leave? Because, she replied. He didn't want anyone to see him weak. He loved you kids. He didn't want to leave you, but he couldn't stand the thought of you seeing him struggle, and when he started to get really sick, he was determined to leave so you didn't see him that way. He was always really harsh on himself, saying he was good for nothing or useless. I always had to tell him he wasn't. He'd just get down on himself sometimes and talk about himself like he was worthless. I almost refused to go. I didn't even pack any of my stuff up until the morning your uncle came to load up the moving truck with our stuff. I realized I couldn't change his mind. Her response left me speechless. Do you think his time as a soldier had anything to do with him being like that? Of course, she replied. He wanted everyone to think he was big and strong and put together. That's how officers always had to be. He didn't fool anyone, though. Even before he got sick, he was 6 feet tall and only 120 pounds. He was the only man I've ever heard of that was too skinny for the military uniform after he got out. So why is there the elephant joke? It was easier for him to say that than tell people he was scared. Next, we started walking through the trailer until we got to Poppy's old bedroom. I saw all of his stuff still sitting on the nightstand and the pictures of his parents still hanging on the walls. His wallet was still tucked away where he last left it, almost 10 years before. At the foot of the bed sat Meemaw Slippers. I never asked her why she slept in that room. I always told myself she was sleeping there for some grand romantic purpose, perhaps to make up for all the nights they couldn't sleep in the same bed due to his nightmares, trying to get back something that was taken from her long ago. Or maybe just to feel close to him again, to feel the faded outline of his body in the springs. "Why do you sleep here?" I asked hesitantly, expecting a beautiful answer, an explanation like one of the ones in my head. "Because I'm an old lady and I live alone in the middle of nowhere, and this room is closest to the front door. If someone tries to break in, I want to be so close I can hear them and call the police." My grandiose ideas were shattered, knocked away by the sheer force of practicality. "Besides," she added, "I've heard that a lot of wives in a lot of different cultures sleep in their husbands' old beds. I guess I'm just doing what all women do." Her answers slightly restored my intrigue and suppositions. The photo I chose for today is from Hawaii. Poppy mentions a possible trip there once again, so I figured I'd include one of the photos he took when he stopped over there. It depicts a car speeding along the road, passing a storefront for Japanese Airlines, Dairy Queen, a footwear store, a jewelry store, and some business called Lindora at Waikiki. That is how I am confident in stating that this photo is from Hawaii. Meemaw will correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure they don't actually take the trip to Hawaii together that they talk about. 7 Feb. 65. My Dearest Suzie. I suppose by now you have heard the news of the VC attacks on American compounds over here. We got the word about it this morning when we got up, and of course everybody is real upset about it. Now we are all sweating out the dead and wounded list from Pleiku. We had some people from the 62nd and a lot of the 3rd up there. And of course, we have the worry of getting hit ourselves again. I'm in another bad mood tonight, as you can no doubt understand. It seems like for every step we take forward, we go back too. It is hopeless. And on top of everything else, Charlie was a bad boy today. He's been running loose around here, and everybody plays with him, but he has learned how to open the doors on most of the hooches. So today he got in one of them while we were all out and made hash out of somebody's. Today was my first day off this month, and it wasn't actually a day off. I had to go out this morning and give 2 check rides, so I flew about 2 hours. I guess the holidays are over now. We have a big troop lift tomorrow. I have a pretty good setup in my room for coffee now. I keep a jar of instant, and I scrounged up an electric coffee pot that works, so I keep hot water in it all the time. Well, you said you liked long letters. Maybe this will make up for the last 2. I love you very much and miss you all. Kiss the boys for me and tell Billy I'm still looking for a letter. Charlie is fine. All my love. Bill. P.S. 8 months isn't so long. It isn't as long as a pregnancy. Bill. In this letter, Poppy wrote home to Meemaw with a heavy heart. News had just reached him about the Viet Cong attack on American compounds in Pleiku, and the weight of it was settling over his unit. His letter is brief, but the frustration and exhaustion in his words are undeniable. The attack on Pleiku was a turning point in U.S. involvement in Vietnam. In the early morning hours of February 7th, the Viet Cong launched a surprise assault on Camp Holloway, an American helicopter base in the Central Highlands. 8 Americans were killed, over 100 were wounded, and several aircraft were destroyed or damaged. The immediate U.S. response was swift. Within hours, President Lyndon B. Johnson ordered Operation Flaming Dart, a series of airstrikes against North Vietnamese targets. This marked a shift from a primarily advisory and support role to direct military engagement. The Pleiku attack reinforced the belief among U.S. leadership that a stronger military presence was necessary, leading to further escalation, including the eventual deployment of ground combat troops. For the men stationed in Vietnam, this attack sent a clear message. The war was escalating, and the enemy was capable of reaching them where they lived. Poppy and his fellow soldiers weren't just hearing about casualties. They were waiting for names, wondering if their friends and comrades were among the dead. The attack on Pleiku wasn't just a news event. It was personal. Poppy's letter that day captures something raw. He states, "It is hopeless." He says it in frustration, exhaustion, and fear. But what did he mean by it? Was it the feeling of futility, seeing progress erased by every new attack? Was it the realization that no amount of preparation could stop the enemy from getting through? Or was it something more personal? An exhaustion that came from months of relentless operations, sleepless nights, and the weight of knowing that every mission carried the risk of not coming back. The attack on Pleiku also came at a time when U.S. soldiers were starting to feel the wear of the war. They weren't just fighting an enemy they could see, they were fighting uncertainty, shifting strategies, and a growing sense that victory, as they had originally imagined it, might not be possible. Poppy wasn't the only one who felt this way. Many veterans would later talk about the slow realization that Vietnam wasn't a war with a clear end. As the conflict dragged on, hopelessness settled into the minds of many soldiers. Some kept going out of duty, some out of camaraderie, some simply because there was no other option. Even in his fear, Poppy keeps going. He writes about his unit's upcoming mission, about his makeshift coffee setup, and about his love for his family. Even in his darkest moments, he finds small ways to stay grounded. This letter is a reminder that war isn't just about battles, it's about the people caught in them, dealing with the emotional and mental toll of it all. If you've been following along with Dearest Suzie, you know that Poppy's letters have shifted over time. Some days he's lighthearted, others he's frustrated. This letter, written on the day of one of the most pivotal attacks in early 1965, is one of the more revealing ones. It shows us what war feels like in real time, when the news isn't just headlines, it's something you're living through. We have to wonder how many times that day he asked himself, "Are we next?" The photo I chose for today shows Charlie climbing up someone's pants. According to Poppy, he was a bit of a base mascot, and people would often play with him to distract themselves. Though he caused a lot of trouble for Poppy, making hash out of people's living quarters, I hope he was able to bring joy to some of the guys as often as he could.
Feb. 9, 1965. Dear Suzie, I received 2 letters today, one from you and one from your mother. Your mother thanked me for the package and told me the other things she wants from here. Then your letter telling me all the things you want. I have already checked on the perfume over here, and I guarantee you don't want any of it. It is cheap, but it's made in Vietnam and smells terrible. If I ever find any real French perfume, I'll get you some. As for a jacket with a helicopter on it, I had already planned on bringing one for each of us and the boys when I come home. Evidently, you don't pay much attention to the letters I write you. I distinctly remember telling you what I put in for when I put in my preference sheet. I put in for MacDill Field or Fort Dix. I don't want to go straight from here to Germany. In fact, I don't care if I never leave the States when I get back. Another thing, I spent one whole letter on the subject of your meeting me in Hawaii. You never bothered to answer. As to the subject of your smoking, I certainly can't say anything against it if you want to smoke, and I remember suggesting a long time ago when you wanted to lose weight that smoking would do it. But you don't need to lose weight now. So I can't say I'm overjoyed at the idea. You mentioned that now we could sit and smoke together. We don't need anything else in common. My love for you and our 3 fine boys are all that I ask that we have in common. But, like I say, if you want to smoke, I certainly can't say anything about it, as much as I smoke. But don't say you are doing it, or do it just so we will have something to do together when I get home. Believe me, we will have plenty of things to do together. Well, I guess that is enough complaining. I suppose you know about the trouble we have had over here. Sok Trong was hit. An outpost about 1.5 miles from here was hit at the same time. We sat out in our helicopters on the runway watching the shooting. We were all scared to death that they were going to hit us next, but they never did. But it is still hard to relax around here. We all know that we are overdue to be hit. This is the only airfield in Vietnam that has not been hit yet. Anyway, I guess I will stop complaining for one time. I guess you can tell the kind of mood I'm in. We are on the 15 standby to evacuate this area, and every time I hear the least noise, my heart stops. I love you very much, and I miss you and the boys, who you didn't even mention in your last letter. Very much. All my love. Bill. If you haven't listened to the past few episodes yet, you'll likely be a bit lost for the rest of today's episode. Long story short, I've split up a piece of my writing, and I'm presenting it across a few episodes. I recommend going back and listening to the earlier part. Anyway, here's the conclusion to Finding My Grief. Then, just across from Poppy's office, which held the large pixelated picture Meemaw held during his celebration of life. We came across the first photo they take of a soldier when they finish basic. It faded long ago, but still proudly hangs in her hallway of fame. "Wasn't he so handsome?" she asked proudly. "Very. I wish I could have inherited some of his good looks," I quipped. "No, unfortunately, you look too much like your Meemaw," she replied with a big grin. "Was he a good soldier?" I asked. "Did people like him?" "He was around so many people and had so many jobs. What did people think of him?" "Well," she began, "the best way to answer that question is to tell you this. One day, when we were living on base, he got a call that one of the men he was training went to the roof of the tallest building and threatened to jump. He kept saying he wanted to kill himself. For some reason, they called Bill. I didn't think it was a good idea to call him out there, but they wanted him. When Pop got there, he yelled up to the guy, asking him why he wanted to kill himself. The man yelled back down that the army was too tough and that he just wanted to get out. Pop got annoyed and told him that he either needed to jump right then and there or come down to stop wasting everyone's time. The story would have been unbelievable if I had never met my grandfather, but it sounded exactly like something he would have done. "So what happened?" I asked. She smiled. The guy climbed back down and asked why Poppy had to be so mean to him. I asked Pop that too. He told me that he wasn't mean. He saved the guy's life and stopped wasting everyone's time. That was just how he did things in the army. Finally, we got to the only picture that exists, which features Meemaw and Poppy, their 4 sons, the 4 wives at the time, and all 10 grandchildren. It was a graphic representation of everything Meemaw and Poppy built over the years, even if some parts have come crashing down since. I didn't ask about that photograph. Everything I needed to know, Meemaw was telling me through the look on her face. The pride, the love, the pain, the loss. It was all there. I was there too. The youngest, but certainly not the smallest. My curly blonde hair blowing in the breeze, standing just in front of Poppy and his muted smile. He wasn't the perfect grandfather, father, or husband for that matter, but I still miss him, Al. Me too, Meemaw. Do you still think about him? Every day. In the years since, Meemaw has shared with me something that she and Poppy used to say to each other. We were 2 halves and we still couldn't make a whole. They may have felt that way, but at the very least, to me, they were whole. It was on that trip when we walked through her rickety trailer and sorted through the things they accumulated over 55 years that I found my grief. I was no longer angry at Poppy or his decisions. I didn't resent his apathy or his beliefs. I realized that I couldn't understand why he made the choices he made, but I could try. Among the slides of Vietnam, letters to Meemaw, VHSs no one wanted, large collection of stolen beer glasses from Germany, and mountains of dusty sheets, I found my grief. It was the first real step I could take towards healing from his loss. I may have once been that angry teenager. I may have stayed that way for a long time. But it was through understanding, honesty, the search for truth, that I found a way to grieve. That grief allowed me to heal and start to understand a complicated person better than I ever thought possible. I'm glad I found my grief. I'm thankful I came to an understanding that made it easier to heal. An understanding brought about through a few simple questions and the patience to find answers, even ones I didn't expect. I'm saying all this to say, you can do it too. Thank you for indulging me in listening to that over these past few episodes. I hope you have enjoyed. The photo I chose for today is a picture from a helicopter cockpit on the ground. It is aimed at another helicopter. They are sitting in a field with a forest around them. 11 Feb. 65. Dearest Suzie, how are you and the boys getting along? I suppose you know how things are over here. We are on a continuous 30-minute alert. It is pretty rough right now. I sent your ring off this morning. If you don't have it already, you will get it pretty soon. I'm sorry that I couldn't get it to you by Valentine's Day, but I didn't miss it by much. I hope you like it and that it fits. I think Lewis did a fine job picking it out. I wouldn't have done any better, I'm sure. I would like for you, if you can, to get by this month without any money from me. If you have to put anything off till payday, do it. I'll be sending you a check around $75 payday. And if they pay me for W-2 for half a month, it will be more than that. This promotion will mean a $40 a month raise for us. But I want to save some this month, so I can pay for the repair of the camera and get it in the mail to you so you can get me some slides. And don't worry about working this camera. It is all automatic. Town is off limits to us now. It has been since the trouble started in Pleiku. And no telling how long it will be before we can get down into town. Did you hear anything on the radio about the trouble at Sok Trang? They were mortared the other night, but no one was hurt. They were lucky. I'm sorry I couldn't send you and the boys a Valentine. The PX doesn't have any, and we couldn't get into town, although I'm sure they didn't have any either. But anyway, I think you know that you, Billy, Brian, and Brett are my only Valentines. I love you all very much. Sincerely, Bill. In this letter, Poppy mentions the attack on Sok Trang, which was an important military location during the Vietnam War, primarily because of its airfield. The Sok Trang Army Airfield was used heavily by the U.S. Army aviation units, especially helicopter squadrons. It was strategically important due to its location in the Mekong Delta, where the Viet Cong had strongholds and often launched attacks. In early February 1965, the Viet Cong launched a series of attacks across South Vietnam, including the attack on Pleiku, which led to a U.S. retaliation known as Operation Flaming Dart. These attacks signaled an escalation of the war, pushing the U.S. closer to full-scale involvement. Poppy's letter mentions that Sok Trang was mortared, but that no one was hurt. This suggests a typical Viet Cong tactic, harassing fire on military installations to disrupt operations, damage equipment, and shake morale. Mortar attacks were often quick and unpredictable, forcing soldiers to remain on high alert, which aligns with him mentioning that they were on continuous 30-minute alert. Why was it attacked? Well, the airfield at Sok Trang supported helicopter operations, which were vital for reconnaissance, troop transport, and medevac missions. The Viet Cong would have wanted to weaken these capabilities. It was also close to VC-controlled areas. The Mekong Delta had a strong Viet Cong presence, making U.S. outposts and airfields prime targets for attacks. Even if the attack didn't cause significant damage, it would have kept soldiers like Bill on edge, as he expresses in his letter. The fear of a larger attack would have worn on morale. Poppy's tone talking about this attack suggests growing frustration and exhaustion. He mentions that town is off limits, meaning increased restrictions for soldiers who are already under stress. He also talks about how it's difficult to relax because they know they are overdue to be hit, a feeling that would have been common among soldiers stationed at air bases like Sok Trang. He also mentions the PX, which stands for Post Exchange. This was essentially a military-run store on bases where service members could buy goods, kind of like a general store for the military. PXs sold essentials like toiletries, snacks, and gifts, but also larger items like electronics and even jewelry. They were a small slice of home, offering American goods that brought comfort in a war zone. Things like Coca-Cola, cigarettes, magazines, and even vinyl records. But the PX wasn't just about shopping. It was also a social hub. Soldiers would stop in to browse, chat, or just take a brief escape from the pressures of duty. Some PXs even had barbershops, tailors, or small restaurants like snack bars, or later, even fast food chains. Since Bill mentions not being able to buy a Valentine's gift, it's a reminder that even the PX had its limitations. When town was off limits, soldiers lost access to more personal shopping options, making it harder to send meaningful gifts home. And not all PXs were the same. Bigger bases had better stocked stores, while remote locations might have had only the bare essentials. In some cases, higher-ranking officers had access to better goods, leaving enlisted men with fewer options. The photo I chose for today depicts a hand-drawn sign from Sok Trang, featuring 5 different graphics. It has text that reads 121st Aviation Company. Welcome to Sok Trang Army International Aerial Port. Elevation plus or minus 2 feet. The famed Sok Trang Tigers. (14 Feb. 65). Dearest Suzie, today I got a thank you card and a Valentine card from your mother. Better watch her. I'm only kidding. I enjoy hearing from her. Yesterday, I got the cards from you and the boys and a letter from B. That bracelet didn't fit Audrey's arm.
I was sorry to hear that. Our promotion orders came down yesterday, but they haven't given them to us yet. I guess they are waiting until they can get the whole company together and make a big deal out of it. I don't care about all that. All it means to me is about $40 a month more and the title, Chief. Otherwise, news from here is short. We are still restricted and on a 30-minute alert. It is a pretty rough life, but at least we are almost halfway finished. B told me that John's girls got the dolls and they liked them. I was glad to hear that. But I kind of thought John's wife would write and let me know they got them. We had another troop lift today. If we keep up at that rate we're going, I'll have so many air medals when I come home I won't have room for all of them. Today was a real quiet one, though, I'm glad to say. Tell the boys that I miss them and I love you all very much. Thank you for the Valentine's cards. They were cute. Don't worry about the tape. I have about given up on getting it too. All my love, Bill. Poppy's reaction to his promotion in this letter is pretty telling. He's not interested in the ceremony, just the pay raise and maybe the title. That attitude was common among enlisted soldiers and warrant officers, who often saw promotions as just another bureaucratic step rather than a major personal achievement. Since he refers to himself as Chief, he was likely promoted from Warrant Officer 1 to Chief Warrant Officer 2, WO1 to CW2. In the Army, warrant officers are a distinct category between enlisted personnel and commissioned officers. Unlike traditional officers who focus on command and leadership, warrant officers are technical specialists, highly trained in their fields, whether that's aviation, engineering, or intelligence. For helicopter pilots, like Poppy, warrant officer promotions were largely based on experience rather than command authority. As a WO1, he would have been considered a junior officer, still proving himself. As a CW2, he gained more seniority and credibility, but his role remained centered on flying missions rather than overseeing troops. If he continued advancing through the warrant officer ranks, the highest position he could reach would be Chief Warrant Officer 5, CW5, a rare and prestigious rank reserved for the most experienced technical experts. However, at this stage in his career, Poppy's focus clearly wasn't on climbing the ranks, it was simply on getting home. To modern ears, a $40 pay increase doesn't sound significant, but in 1965 that was a noticeable boost in income. Adjusted for inflation, $40 then is roughly equivalent to $400 today. Military pay was structured on strict schedules, so any bump in rank provided a predictable financial benefit. Soldiers relied heavily on these pay raises to cover unexpected expenses, send home gifts, or save for the future. In his letters, Bill frequently mentioned money matters, planning for household needs, paying for repairs, and making sure Suzie could manage without extra funds for a month if necessary. His concern about finances was practical. Even though the military provided housing and some essentials, enlisted families often had to budget carefully. The increase in rank also meant potential access to additional benefits, like better housing or allowances. Despite the official significance of a promotion, Bill's day-to-day routine likely remained the same. His duties as a helicopter pilot wouldn't change drastically just because he advanced to chief. That being said, there were still tangible benefits. Higher-ranking officers often had better housing, better food, and more respect among their peers and superiors. While these changes were sometimes subtle, they contributed to an improved quality of life. Additionally, senior warrant officers were given more input in mission planning and operations. Poppy's experience in combat zones meant that as he climbed the ranks, his opinion would carry more weight. However, as he mentions, he wasn't interested in the prestige. He just wanted to get his job done, earn his pay, and come home to his family. Poppy doesn't seem particularly interested in the formalities of a promotion ceremony. He suspects that his superiors are waiting to get the whole company together to make a big event out of it, but he clearly doesn't see the need for it. This was a common sentiment among soldiers, especially those deployed in active combat zones. To them, these ceremonies were just another military tradition, important for maintaining structure but not necessarily something they personally valued. Military ceremonies served a larger purpose. They reinforced the hierarchy, instilled discipline, and acknowledged achievements in a formal way. Some soldiers took great pride in these events, while others, like Poppy, saw them as unnecessary distractions. For pilots constantly flying dangerous missions, formalities took a back seat to the reality of their work. However, in a setting where camaraderie and morale were crucial, these ceremonies also provided a rare chance to pause and recognize accomplishments, something that can mean a lot to validate one's actions in an environment where life was unpredictable. The photo I chose for today shows us the Viet Cong Manor Officers Club, a place I know that Chief spent a lot of time with his friends. 16 Feb. 65. Dearest Suzie, I received the tape from you today and was glad to get it. I was tickled at the boy. I'll bet you have your hands full with them. I'm glad Shirley likes your pins. I will get her one and send it to you as soon as I can get into town. I'm scared to go into town, although it is not off limits anymore. I still don't go any more than I have to. I'm about to go stir crazy because I haven't been off the compound in about 2 weeks. The walls are closing in on me. The camera didn't come back yet. I'll get it in the mail to you as soon as I get it. We finally got our orders last night, and of course, we all got drunk. The old man made a big production out of it, with pictures and newspaper accounts and everything. You might pay attention to the Orlando papers. They may carry the article next month. They will also probably carry the article about our awards, too. We will probably have an awards ceremony next month. I know that I have already earned 6 air medals, but it takes a long time to get them. There is not a lot going on over here right now. I just wish things would stay this quiet for the next 7 months. I love you all and miss you very much. Kiss the boys for me. All my love. Bill. In this letter, Bill writes about something that gives us a glimpse into how the war was being portrayed back home. Newspaper coverage. He tells Suzie to check the Orlando Sentinel because their unit might be featured along with an upcoming award ceremony. This small detail reveals a lot about how soldiers like Bill understood their service and how families back home followed the war through local news. During this stage of the Vietnam War, newspapers still framed American involvement in an overwhelmingly positive light. Articles focused on acts of bravery, awards, and achievements rather than the day-to-day realities of combat. While Bill's letters often express exhaustion and frustration, the version of the war that would appear in print was much more polished, highlighting commendations and ceremonies instead of the strain of constant alert and isolation. Bill himself acknowledges the public-facing nature of it all, mentioning that their commanding officer made a big production out of their orders, complete with pictures and press coverage. For families back home, seeing a loved one's name in the newspaper was often a point of pride. It was a way to feel connected, to believe their sacrifices were being recognized, and to reassure themselves that their soldier was doing well. But that kind of public recognition didn't always match the private experiences of those actually fighting. Bill's letters show how isolated he felt, stuck on the compound, afraid to go into town even though it was no longer off limits. The walls were closing in on him, yet back in Orlando, the headlines might tell a very different story. The military played an active role in shaping how the war was reported, working closely with newspapers to highlight achievements and boost morale. Bill's mention of the upcoming award ceremony is a reminder that these moments weren't just for the soldiers. They were carefully documented and sent back home to reinforce the idea of progress. But, as we'll see in later letters and have already seen, the reality of Vietnam was far more complicated than the stories printed in the local newspaper. I was fortunate enough a few years ago to go to the Library of Congress and actually do a bit of archival research on this project. One of the things I did was look through nationally popular newspapers in the U.S. for mentions of Poppy or the 114th Aviation Company. I didn't find the one mentioned in this letter of the Orlando Sentinel. The only mention of Poppy I found anywhere was in the Chicago Tribune. They were doing a day in the life of a soldier and mentioned him as a helicopter pilot on a radio. Maybe I'll read it to you all on the show one day. The photo I chose for today reflects a slice of daily life for Poppy as a soldier, not one likely seen in American newspapers. It shows 2 women washing clothes on a patio outside. Behind them is a gate with sandbags stacked around it. Above them are white shirts hanging on a clothesline to dry. Once again, we see the dynamic relationship between the soldiers and people who lived nearby the bases. They hired these women to do their laundry. These women could have been VC agents or spies in contact with the very people who were mortaring nearby bases. They also could have just been trying to make an honest living during a time of war where their usual means for income had evaporated due to the danger. Who knows? "18 Feb. 65. Dearest Suzie, I received a letter from you today, and I was very glad to get it. I think today has been the blackest day of my life. I went out to shoot auto rotations with Captain West, my platoon leader. I tried to show him a good straight in auto rotation, and I crashed. I am afraid that the helicopter was totaled, and I guess we are lucky to be alive. But I am probably finished as an IP. I got your tape yesterday, and I really got a kick out of the boys. Things are about the same over here, although I guess this is the worst I have ever felt since I started flying. Please excuse this short letter. I can't seem to get my mind on writing tonight, but I love you very much, and I need you, especially right now. All my love, Bill. This letter is unlike any of the others we've seen so far. Poppy has written about exhaustion, stress, and even moments of fear, but this time his words carry something different. Self-doubt. The phrase he uses to describe the day is striking, the blackest day of my life. Considering that he has already faced enemy fire, high-risk missions, and the constant uncertainty of war, this statement carries a heavy weight. Something about this crash cut deeper than anything he had experienced before. As a pilot, Poppy knew the risks of flying, especially in Vietnam, where helicopters were constantly under strain, heavy loads, unpredictable terrain, and relentless combat conditions. But this wasn't a crash in combat. This was a training exercise, a controlled maneuver meant to demonstrate skill and precision, and yet it ended in disaster. He doesn't dwell on the physical damage, though we can assume the helicopter was a total loss, since he writes, "I'm afraid that the helicopter was totaled, and I guess we are lucky to be alive." Instead, what truly weighs on him is what this means for his role. Poppy was an instructor pilot, responsible for training other aviators, and his fear isn't just about the accident, it's about what it might cost him. I'm probably finished as an IP. That sentence alone tells us how much his identity as a pilot and teacher mattered to him. It wasn't just a title, it was something he took pride in. If his leadership no longer trusted him to train others, what did that say about his abilities? What did that say about him? His confidence, something so crucial to a pilot, seemed shaken for the first time. Poppy has been through combat, through dangerous troop lifts, through long days and nights with little rest. He has written about exhaustion, about restrictions and alert status, about wishing the war would stay quiet for the next 7 months. But this is different. His letter is short, almost hesitant, as if he can't bring himself to say more. Even when things were difficult before, his letters always contained details, updates, and observations, but now it's as if he's struggling to find the words. It's telling that this is the first time we see him truly rattled. Combat was dangerous, but it was also expected. There was an understanding that enemy fire was part of the job. A crash during a training exercise, though? That felt different. That felt avoidable. And for someone who prided himself on his skill, that realization had to sting. He writes, "I guess this is the worst I ever have felt since I started flying." That's a strong statement, and it tells us just how much this moment affected him. Perhaps the most vulnerable moment in this letter comes at the very end. Poppy doesn't just sign off with love, he reaches out in a way he hasn't before. "I love you very much, and I need you, especially right now." It's raw, almost desperate, and it shows just how shaken he is. There's nothing Suzie can do from halfway across the world, but just writing to her, knowing she'll read his words, seemed to be a form of comfort. Throughout his letters, we've seen how much he relies on the connection to home. It's what keeps him grounded, what gives him a sense of normalcy in a world that is anything but normal. In this moment of doubt, she is the one person he turns to. This letter isn't about reporting his day or making conversation, it's about reassurance. He needs to feel that despite what happened, he is still the man he was before the crash. That he is still the husband, father, and pilot that he wants to be. This letter marks a turning point in Poppy's deployment, not necessarily in terms of his career, but in terms of how he sees himself. Up until now, his letters have been steady. Even when things were difficult, he seemed to take it all in stride, but now, for the first time, he sounds uncertain. He doesn't just sound tired, he sounds lost. It makes you wonder, how does he recover from this? How does he pick himself back up and keep flying? And perhaps the most important question of all, does this moment change the way he sees himself as a pilot? The photo I chose for today depicts a crashed helicopter in a field. This is almost certainly not the one Poppy was flying, but it is at least a good example of what it could have looked like. Saturday, 20 Feb. 65. Dearest Suzie, I received another letter from you yesterday in the Valentine present. I don't know why you could think I couldn't use it. I sure can. Thank you very much. That set showed real good taste, and I like it. And thank you for not sending me a shirt. I'm only joking. Well, it has been 2 days now since I sacked that helicopter up. I was so stunned for a while I couldn't figure out what happened. I just couldn't imagine something like that happening to me after 1,100 hours of flying. I voluntarily gave up my IP privileges for a while. I don't know if they would have taken them or not, but it will take a long time for me to gain my confidence back. Yesterday, I went to Saigon to get a physical. While I was up there, the army or someone tried to overthrow the government again. It was nothing unusual for the people in Saigon, but it scared me to pieces. When we got out to our helicopter to take off, there were tanks and armed troops all over the field. The tanks were all pointed at the Vietnamese Air Force area. We all got in the helicopter to take off, expecting them to try to stop us, but they even moved a tank so we could take off. It was strictly a Vietnamese problem. They wouldn't stop Americans, but they wouldn't let any of their own planes take off. The control tower operator told us that he had no idea what was going on, and we would have to take off at our own risk. We figured the best thing for us to do was get away from Saigon as soon as possible. Sure enough, we were only off the ground about 5 minutes when they closed the field completely. I guess it opened up again today. You will probably hear about it on the radio. There is never a dull moment over here. These people formed a good government the other day. I doubt very seriously if they have any power today. The Vinh Long area is pretty quiet. We didn't even have any missions today, so everybody is out right now sunbathing. This hot weather is ideal for that. As I sit here at my desk writing, I can look out my window and see our Vietnamese laborers filling sandbags. It takes at least 3 sandbags to stop a mortar round, and they are trying to cover everything here with them. They have to fill up about 2 million of them for this compound alone. Charlie is doing fine. He had me worried the other day. He got someone's shaving cream and ate some of it. It made him real sick. And I can't keep him locked up. It will cost me $2 a pound to ship him home. And time I get ready to go, he will be pretty big, so I don't know. Say hello to the boys for me and kiss them. I love you all very much. All my love. Bill. P.S. I didn't forget about sending you that camera. It just didn't come back yet. Love you. In this letter, we see that Poppy is still reeling from the helicopter crash, and it's clear that the shock hasn't worn off. He writes, I was so stunned for a while I couldn't figure out what happened. That feeling of disbelief is powerful. This wasn't just any mistake, it was something that completely shook his confidence after 1,100 hours of flying. When someone with that much experience suddenly faces failure, it's not just about the immediate consequences, it's about questioning everything they thought they knew. His decision to voluntarily step back from his instructor pilot role is especially telling. He's not sure if the Army would have stripped him of the title, but he removes himself from the position anyway. That suggests he isn't thinking about punishment, he's thinking about trust, both in himself and from others. How do you regain confidence after an incident like this? How does it affect the way you see yourself as a pilot? The 1965 South Vietnamese coup was part of the ongoing political instability that plagued South Vietnam during the Vietnam War. On February 19, 1965, a group of dissident officers led by General Lam Vam Phat and Colonel Pham Ngoc Thao attempted to overthrow the ruling military junta headed by General Nguyen Khan. Their opposition stemmed from dissatisfaction with Khan's leadership, particularly among Catholic officers who felt marginalized under his rule. The coup unfolded with rebel forces moving tanks and troops into Saigon, swiftly seizing key government buildings, radio stations, and the airport. They surrounded Tan Son Nut Air Base, where Khan and other government officials were stationed, effectively cutting them off. However, Khan managed to rally loyal forces, particularly those under General Nguyen Cao Khai, commander of the South Vietnamese Air Force, and General Nguyen Chan Thai. With the backing of Khai's air power and mounting U.S. pressure, the coup collapsed within a day. Despite the attempted overthrow, Khan chose not to execute the coup leaders, instead allowing them to go into exile, a decision that further weakened his authority. Just a month later, on March 11, 1965, Khan was forced to resign under American pressure, paving the way for a more stable military leadership under Nguyen Van Thuy and Nguyen Cao Khai, who would dominate South Vietnam's government until 1975. The failed coup reinforced the perception that South Vietnam's government was unstable, making it harder to wage an effective war against the Viet Cong.
It also frustrated the United States, which was preparing to escalate its involvement in Vietnam. President Johnson saw the ongoing infighting as a major obstacle to the war effort, as the constant coups and leadership changes undermined both military efficiency and public trust. This turmoil benefited the communist insurgency, which thrived on South Vietnam's internal divisions. Poppy's trip to Saigon for a routine physical turns into a front-row seat to political chaos. He describes the scene with an almost casual detachment, saying, "It was nothing unusual for the people in Saigon, but it scared me to pieces." That contrast is striking. Saigon civilians have become numb to coups, while Poppy, an experienced combat pilot, is on edge. The image he paints is dramatic. Tanks and armed troops covering the airfield, all positioned against the Vietnamese Air Force. What's most intense is the moment of uncertainty. He and his crew don't know if they'll be stopped. The control tower operator offers no guidance, simply telling them they're taking off at their own risk. That's an eerie statement. It suggests no one in command really knew what was happening. Poppy and his crew make the call to leave as soon as possible, and it turns out to be the right one. The airfield shuts down just minutes after they take off. That timing makes the story even more gripping. If they had hesitated, they might have been grounded in the middle of an armed standoff. His assessment of the situation is blunt. It was strictly a Vietnamese problem. He recognizes that as Americans, they weren't the targets, but the instability of South Vietnam's government made their position unpredictable. He doubts the newly formed government will last, which is a sharp insight. South Vietnam had already cycled through multiple leaders in just over a year, and it wouldn't stabilize anytime soon. Despite the drama of the last 2 days, Poppy notes that the Vinh Long area is pretty quiet. The shift in tone is almost jarring. He just survived a helicopter crash, narrowly escaped a coup in Saigon, and now he's watching his fellow soldiers sunbathe. That contrast speaks to the strange rhythm of war. One moment, everything is life or death. The next, soldiers are lying out in the sun as if they were on a beach. But the quiet doesn't mean there's no danger. He describes watching Vietnamese laborers fill sandbags, noting that it takes at least 3 sandbags to stop a mortar round, and they are trying to cover everything here with them. That's a haunting detail. It tells us just how vulnerable they feel. Every wall, every structure needs reinforcement. The sheer number of sandbags, 2 million for their compound alone, hints at the constant, looming threat of attack. This passage also speaks to the strange mix of normalcy and preparation. Sunbathing and fortifying defenses are happening at the same time, highlighting how soldiers had to balance the mundane with the ever-present possibility of violence. The photo I chose for today depicts the facade for the Saigon Tan Son Nhut Airport, the same place where the main drama occurred for Poppy. "1965, 02, 22. Dearest Suzie, I received your letter yesterday saying that you and Brett had been sick, and I was pretty sorry to hear it. I'm glad you are over it now. I hope Brian enjoyed his birthday. I didn't forget it, but I couldn't get him anything anyway. But I promise I will make up to all 3 of them when I get home. I'm sure that by now you must have received your ring. Does it fit all right, and do you like it? I still haven't got that camera back yet. I'm afraid that they are sending it regular mail. If they are, it will be a couple of months before I get it. I got another letter from your mother yesterday. She sent me $5 and told me to send her another souvenir if I could find something she liked, or else buy cigarettes with it. She mentioned before that she would like to have one of those musical jewelry boxes, so if they ever put town back on limits, I'll get her one of them. I haven't been overworked lately, but the pressure over here is terrible right now. We went on a troop lift yesterday. We only flew 2 hours all day, but we ran into a mess of VC in one area and got 2 aircraft shot up. No one was hurt, though. And of course, since all the trouble up north, we have been on alert down here. We have at least 2 gunships up all the time, and our mortar fires continuously at night and makes it almost impossible to sleep. But we are surviving, and just think we only have 6 months and 35 days left. I love you all and miss you very much. Sincerely, Bill. The episode today will hopefully be brief. Today is a big day for me. It's my wedding day. On an occasion such as this, I like to reflect on things. In the context of this show, is there a lot to reflect on even? Well, if I compare myself to my grandfather, we are seemingly 2 drastically different people. At 28, I'm getting married. He was married 9 years before that. I have no kids. He had 3 and another within 4 years of returning home from Vietnam. I've spent most of my adult life at college. He spent most of his up to this point in the military, on a base, doing some sort of training or exercise. I'm not a pilot and can barely drive a car for that matter. He was in one of the first warrant officer classes for helicopter pilots. I don't have much money. Poppy, on the other hand, well, maybe we are more similar than I thought. All jokes aside, how are he and I the same? Well, his letters tell me that although he's strong, he's also fragile. He sees things that nearly break him completely while in Vietnam. The older I get, the more fragile I realize I truly am. As I've noted before, when I was doing fieldwork for my PhD, I had a gun pointed at me that I didn't see. Just knowing that has really been hard for me to deal with. At this point, Poppy has gotten fired at regularly in his 5 months overseas. He's been around mortar fire and rockets and so much more. When I think about things in those terms, comparing who I am and where I'm at mentally and emotionally to him, I really start to understand why he was the person he was when he got back. He's already noted a few times why he's turned to alcohol to cope with his experiences. Meanwhile, I joke with my friends about how I completed my comprehensive exams for my master's degree while drunk because it was easier to write that way and fight off the anxiety of the task at hand. I know it wasn't healthy, but I did it. He had a thirst for knowledge and was, according to Meemaw, an avid reader. He loved his parents and siblings, but was trying to do better for himself and his family. He liked teaching people around him. He loved to take photographs. He was clever and ambitious and analytical and straightforward. These are all things I'd like to think I got from him. I inherited. But can personality traits even be inherited, or are those learned? Would he have even taught me those things himself if they were learned? What I'm trying to say, in less space than in Finding My Grief, is that if I take a moment to reflect on things, this work has helped me understand who he was as a person and who I am. It's helped me relate to him, even though he's been dead for over 12 years. I'd like to think that those things that made him him, whether they be in material form through his letters and photographs or through his spirit, through his personality and character traits, are the things that I have lived on through me and my dad and my brother and the rest of my family. I have a friend who is a pharmacist, and I was talking to him about the COVID vaccine a few years ago. I was worried about the side effects. His response was, "A good thing you get from a drug is also a side effect. You can't get the good ones without some bad. You just have to hope that there's more good than bad." Perhaps that's the same for the things we inherit from our family, that we adopt from our friends. We'll get good and bad. You just have to hope that, after everything is said and done, you got more of the good of Poppy than the bad. I like to think I did. Either way, this is obviously pre-recorded. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and as always, I appreciate your time and interest. If there are any family or friends listening to this, either on the day it's posted or any time after that, please know that I love you all very much. This experience has been a blessing. I can't imagine Poppy would have said the same about Vietnam, but at least I can say that about getting the opportunity to present his letters. The photo I chose for today appears to be taken in the middle of an early morning troop lift. It is blurry, perhaps taken in a hurry. It is dreamlike in nature. The colors are muted, faces are unclear, helicopters are barely hovering in the air in frame. It's one of my favorites. 24 Feb. 65. Dearest Suzie, I received your letter today saying you got your ring. I was sure glad to hear that you liked it. I was beginning to worry about you getting it. It took long enough getting there. I hope everybody is over the virus down there. I guess this is the right time of year for it. You didn't congratulate me on making chief. You hurt my feelings. Ha ha. How is Billy doing in school these days? You haven't mentioned him in quite a while. I still haven't heard from John and Flo, but I'm sure it is as you say about her being sick. When you write your mother again, tell her that I will send her something as soon as I can go to town. It is still off limits. I will write to her soon. I owe a lot of people a letter right now. Your mother, my ma, and B. I still don't hear from Minnie. On air medals, I haven't been awarded any yet, but I have earned 7. It will probably take another 2 months before we get the first one, but we will probably get 3 or 4 at one time. Don't worry, I will send you the medal itself when I get it. I'll be bragging about it. Everything is the same over here. We flew all day today. We worry about being overrun all the time. In fact, we had an outpost about 4 miles from here overrun today. About 20 troops killed and I don't know how many missing. Never a dull moment. I love you all very much and miss you more than you can ever know. All my love, Bill. Poppy made international news once, and it had nothing to do with Vietnam. He was arrested and detained by Papua New Guinea for allegedly fishing illegally in their waters when he was a tuna boat captain, long after his time in the service. He always said he knew he was screwed when the man walked in with the bone in his nose and feather in his hair and was allegedly the judge. That was going to be the person dealing with his case, responsible for releasing him to the U.S. and getting everything squared away with his boat, crew, and load of fish. My dad was playing touch football in his front yard with his friends when a neighbor ran outside and told him to turn on the TV onto the world news because they were talking about Poppy getting arrested. A few minutes later, the State Department called my family's house, asking for my grandmother. She was at the tanning salon she worked at to help support the 4 boys, and my dad had to relay the message when she got home that someone important needed to speak with her. At least, that's the story I was told. One day, when talking to my grandmother and father about all the pictures, letters, and everything else, my dad decided to mention his theory about Poppy, his service and his time on the tuna boat. He thinks Poppy was in the CIA. Well, maybe not in the CIA, but a contractor for the CIA? What a good cover, huh? When Poppy died, we looked through his things, and we found papers that he had to fill out in the early 60s when the CIA did a background check on him. There was even a paper Mimo had to fill out swearing she wasn't a communist and listing character references. In that case, the arrest wasn't for fishing, it was for something else entirely. I don't particularly know why he'd be spying on Papua New Guinea, but who knows? Is my dad's theory well-founded in logic and reasoning, based on evidence and confirmation from Poppy? Or is it an attempt for a son to make up a story to explain why his dad was never around when he was growing up? Instead of being a drunk, could his dad transform into some CIA contractor saving countless lives and doing things he couldn't even tell us about because they were so important? You tell me. What would be easier to live with? What would make it all more worth it? The photo I chose for today depicts a group of guys standing around a helicopter. They have papers and look to be planning something. The airplane appears to be on an airfield or some sort of base with a gate and fencing in the background. Perhaps this was a common sight for Poppy before his missions, as he and his comrades planned their flights together. "27 Feb. 65. My dearest Suzie, I received your letter tonight and was glad to hear from you. I'm glad you told me about Johnny and that car. I was so mad I couldn't talk. You were darn right I don't want Jim to have it, as long as our names are on the contracts. No, I haven't heard from any of them. They probably would be afraid to tell me. I know that if Jim ever gets that thing out of state, I'll be stuck with it. I wrote Johnny a real nasty letter tonight. I told him that if he couldn't pay for it and couldn't get my name off the contracts, he could bring it over and pack it by the trailer, and that would be one more brother I wouldn't ever have to worry about helping again. If he gets my name off the contracts, then let them do as they please. We certainly don't need another car. I don't care what shape it's in. Enough on that. I just hope he gets my letter before Jim leaves. Well, I just went over and got paid. I have to ask a favor of you. I know that I promised to send you my check this month, but I need it. I am well aware that you need it too. Would you use whatever bonds you need this month, and I will send you my check next month? Also, next month, your bonds will double. I figured that I got a $40 pay raise, so I went and had them double our bond. But this month, 2 things hurt me. We had a promotion party which cost each of us $40. Then, since we spent the last 3 weeks on post, we played poker a lot. I wound up losing $50. I hate to have to tell you that because I know you could use that money, but it happened and there is no sense in lying about it. So go ahead and use whatever bonds you need to get by this month, and I guarantee you I will send you my check next month. I hope this doesn't upset you or put you in a bind this month. I'm glad to hear that you are all doing well, and I hope that you all stay well for the next 7 months at least. I feel sorry for you having to put up with sick kids by yourself. Things are still pretty quiet in our area. We have a little trouble now and then. This morning, for instance, I had to go into a village and evacuate some women and kids and old people that were injured by a VC mortar attack. There was a little boy in one of the groups about Brian's size. He had his left arm about blown off. That brought tears to my eyes. But the sight that will be hard to forget was an old man, about 80, who was hit in both legs. There were no ambulances left for us when we brought him in, so he had to walk about half a block, and he had no shoes at all. And the only person around to help him was a very young girl. She was supporting him the best that she could, but it was a pathetic sight. We couldn't help him, because we had to take off right away for another load. Well, I guess I have rambled long enough. In fact, I've got to quit and go to bed. We have a troop lift at 5 o'clock in the morning. I love you all very much. Kiss the boys for me. All my love. Bill. 6 months and 26 days. Poppy's admission that he lost money in poker and had to contribute to promotion party offers an intimate look at the financial and social dynamics of military life. In an environment where stress levels run high and downtime is limited, poker was more than just a game. It was a way for soldiers to unwind, bond, and maintain a sense of normalcy. But for Bill, this loss stings, especially because he knows Suzie and the boys could use that money. The promotion party also highlights an expectation within the ranks. When someone was promoted, it was tradition for fellow officers to chip in and celebrate. While it may seem like an unnecessary expense, these social events reinforce loyalty and morale among soldiers. Bill doesn't complain about it, but he acknowledges that it contributed to his financial strain. His frustration isn't just about the money, it's about feeling like he let his family down. This moment underscores the constant balancing act between duty, personal sacrifice, and the financial realities of war. The heart of this letter, however, is Bill's description of rescuing civilians wounded in a Viet Cong mortar attack. The image of a small boy, about the same size as his own son, with his arm nearly blown off, is a devastating moment. It's clear this hit Bill on a personal level. He sees his own child in this suffering boy, making the war feel even more immediate and personal. The fact that this experience brought tears to his eyes speaks to the emotional weight of what he had witnessed. Perhaps even more haunting is the old man, hit in both legs, forced to walk barefoot with the help of a young girl because no ambulances were available. The sheer desperation of the situation, coupled with Bill's inability to stop and help, highlights the brutal efficiency of war. There simply wasn't time or resources to provide aid beyond getting people out of danger. Bill's sense of duty meant he had to prioritize getting back in the air for the next group of evacuees, even as he carried the weight of what he'd just seen. These stories reflect a broader tragedy of war, not just for the soldiers fighting it, but for the innocent civilians caught in the crossfire. Bill is not just a soldier in these moments. He is witness to immense human suffering, forced to move forward even when he wants to stop and help. The photo I chose for today was taken by Poppy from his helicopter. It depicts a group of ARVN soldiers evacuating people towards the helicopter over a hill. The soldiers are carrying someone in a makeshift stretcher.
I'm Alex Lowie, and I hope you have enjoyed listening to this episode of Dearest Suzie, and receiving messages from the past that my Poppy wrote exactly 60 years ago. I sincerely appreciate your time and interest. Please consider following the podcast on your preferred platform, and if you're enjoying it, I kindly ask that you take the time to rate the show and leave a review. Also, please follow the project on YouTube, X, and Instagram. All likes, comments, shares, and reviews will help grow the reach of this story. The links for these things should be in the description of this episode. Please feel free to email me at dearestsuziepodcast@gmail.com if you have anything you'd like to say. I'd love to chat or to hear about your stories as well. Thank you for listening, and God bless.